The cafe was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in the spaces between heartbeats. Eleanor sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The afternoon light filtered through the glass, catching the silver strands in her hair and casting a soft glow on her face. She stared out at the street, her mind wandering through the labyrinth of memories she had collected over the years. The door chimed, a gentle sound that barely registered in the stillness. But something made her turn. A shift in the air, perhaps, or the faintest whisper of a long-forgotten instinct. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Thomas stood just inside the doorway, his hand still on the doorframe, as if unsure whether to step forward or retreat. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the passage of time, but his eyes, those piercing, familiar eyes, were the same. They widened in recognition, and a slow, tentative smile spread across his face. "Eleanor?" he said, his voice soft, almost disbelieving. She felt her breath catch in her throat. "Thomas?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that really you?" He approached her table, his steps measured, as though he were afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. "I thought it was you," he said, his smile widening. "You haven't changed a bit." She laughed, a sound that carried the weight of decades. "Oh, I've changed," she said, gesturing to the lines on her face. "But so have you." He chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "Fair enough. May I?" He gestured to the chair across from her. She nodded, and he sat down, his movements careful, deliberate. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. It had been over 50 years since they last saw each other. 50 years of lives lived, loves lost, and dreams deferred. Eleanor had traveled the world, as she always said she would, her heart leading her to distant lands and unfamiliar faces. She had married a man who shared her wanderlust, and together they had built a life filled with adventure and discovery. But when he passed away, she found herself drawn back to the town where it all began, as though the threads of her past were pulling her home. Thomas, on the other hand, had stayed close to home. He had become a teacher, then a principal, dedicating his life to shaping young minds. He had married a woman who grounded him, her love a steady anchor in the storm of life. When she died, he felt adrift, the years stretching out before him like an endless, empty road. And now here they were, two souls who had once been inseparable, meeting again in the twilight of their lives. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Thomas asked, breaking the silence. Eleanor smiled, her eyes distant. "How could I forget? I was rushing to class, and you were standing in the middle of the sidewalk, lost in thought. I nearly knocked you over." "And you spilled my coffee," he added, laughing. "I was so annoyed, but then you laughed, and I couldn't stay mad." "I remember," she said softly. "You said, 'If you're going to ruin my coffee, the least you can do is buy me another one.' And you did," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "We sat in that little cafe by the library for hours, talking about everything and nothing." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. "We were so young then. The world felt so big, so full of possibilities." "It still is," he said, his tone gentle, just in a different way. Over the next few weeks, they began spending more time together. They visited old haunts, places that had once been the backdrop of their love story. The library where they had studied together, the park where they had shared their first kiss, the diner where they had spent countless nights talking about their dreams. Each place held memories, fragments of a life they had once shared. But as they revisited these places, they began to create new memories, weaving the threads of their past into the tapestry of their present. One evening, they found themselves sitting on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the colors bleeding into the deepening blue of the approaching night. Do you ever think about what might have been? Thomas asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. If we had chosen differently? Eleanor was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. All the time, she admitted, but I've come to believe that some loves are meant to teach us, not to stay. And maybe this is our chance to rewrite the ending. Thomas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. What do you mean? She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. I mean that we've been given a second chance, not to go back to who we were, but to move forward as who we are now, to take the pieces of our past and build something new. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and familiar. I'd like that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Eleanor and Thomas found themselves falling into a rhythm, a quiet, steady cadence that felt like coming home. They laughed together, shared stories of their lives, and slowly, the walls they had built around their hearts began to crumble. It wasn't the fiery passion of their youth, but something deeper, more profound. It was the kind of love that comes from knowing someone's soul, from sharing the weight of their joys and sorrows. It was the kind of love that endures, not in spite of time, but because of it. One evening, as they walked along the beach, the waves gently lapping at the shore, Thomas stopped and turned to her. Eleanor, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't want to waste any more time. I've spent too much of my life looking back, wondering what might have been. I want to look forward, with you. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. I want that too, she said, her voice soft but sure. And as the sun set behind them, casting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in unison. Love, they say, is timeless. It doesn't fade with age or wither with time. It simply waits, patiently, for the right moment to bloom again. Eleanor and Thomas found that moment, not in the spring of their lives, but in the autumn, when the world was quieter and their hearts were ready to listen. And so, their story continues, a testament to the enduring power of love, the beauty of second chances, and the quiet magic of finding your way back to where you began. Hi, if you made it this far, thank you. My name is Joe, and I'm just starting out on this YouTube journey. I'm really excited to share more stories and connect with all of you. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts so I can keep growing and improving. Thanks for being part of this adventure, and I hope you have a wonderful day or a good night.